The instant Kody Brown entered the courtroom, it was as though the very air had changed. The heavy wooden doors opened wide, and a tide of whispers and murmurs swept through the building, reverberating off the high ceiling and repeating in each corner. Cameras snapped continuously, the flashes illuminating the room like tiny storms, capturing every nuance of the man who was now both a cultural sensation and a source of outrage for millions of viewers across the globe. He drew the eyes of journalists, attorneys, and passers-by alike, and even the most inattentive witnesses couldn't look away. There was something about Kody Brown that commanded attention, a mixture of celebrity, charm, and the dark tension of a man whose life had been so publicly lived, but now found itself subjected to the harsh glare of the law. The courtroom itself was abuzz. Ranks of benches were taken up by reporters, cameras at the ready and microphones in hand, each of them feeling that today was not going to be business as usual. The scent of freshly polished wood, blended with the faint odor of documents and forms, and the subdued buzz of hushed voices hung in the air. Heads were inclined slightly forward, faces a combination of curiosity and excitement and worry. All knew this was not about Kody's history. It was about the collision of private and public, a collision in the making for years in secret. Kody's image as the patriarch of a plural family had preceded him by many years before he walked into the room. Millions had seen sister wives, having followed the complicated interactions of his home, 4 wives, 17 children, and the complicated array of feelings, fights, and alliances that brought the family both fascination and notoriety. The program had provided portraits of a way of life few knew anything about, intertwining moments of happiness, mayhem, love, and tension. But today, cameras weren't rolling for amusement. Today there would be no rehearsed lines and sensational editing. The court wanted the truth, unvarnished, and Kody was aware that every decision, every move, and every statement might have serious repercussions. Walking down the aisle, his footsteps measured and purposeful, all eyes were upon him. There was an intensity in his face, quiet and still, a blend of confidence and fear and burden of responsibility that had been accumulating for decades. He was a man who had constructed his existence around a family that went against the social norms, and now the very framework he had worked to uphold was being put under the cold, objective scrutiny of the law. The tension was palpable, hanging around him like an intangible cloak. To one side of the courtroom, his ex-wives sat in perfect rows, each woman stern but attentive. Their faces were serene, but there was an evident undercurrent of resolve and expectation. They had borne years of public criticism, personal turmoil, and intricate family relationships, and now were offered an opportunity to express their points of view within the limits of court jurisdiction. There existed between them an implicit shared sense that this day was important, not only for their individual complaints, but for the destiny of their family name, their economic entitlements, and their emotional resolution. Every woman's eyes were direct, every stance mannered, but their eyes told untold stories, stories that the world had only seen through a TV screen. The judge, an icon of power and gravity, dominated the room with an untroubled yet authoritative demeanor. His gavel lay on the gleaming desk before him, a reminder of the final authority that could change lives with a single blow. A silence fell as he looked upon the proceedings, evaluating the room, taking the measure of the tension, and reminding all those who were present unspokenly that the courtroom was a forum for reality, not show. The air vibrated with expectation, a charged electricity that seemed to hum in the very walls of the room. Kody hesitated for a moment beside the bench, smoothing his suit, his hand stroking the material as if to balance himself. The fierceness of the moment could not be denied. The cameras, the strobe lights, the whispers, all a harsh reminder of how very public his life had ever been. But today was different. Today the stakes were real. This time it wasn't about the ratings or viewer participation. It was about accountability, legality, and the individualized consequences of decades of complicated decisions. The juxtaposition of the familiar glare of reality television and the unforgiving scrutiny of the law was jarring, almost claustrophobic, and it hovered above Kody like an impending storm cloud ready to unleash. As he stepped into his place in the courtroom, reporters feverishly took down notes, recording every movement, the lean of his head, the slight clenching of his jaw, the fleeting moment of gaze exchanges with his former wives. Every action was picked apart, examined, and sent to an audience that crossed oceans. Social media updates would blow up within minutes, rumor and theory pouring out quicker than anyone present could keep up. For Kody, the balance of private unrest and public interest had never been so intense. The very room itself contracted around him, its walls closing in under the pressure of history, choices, and anticipation. And then there was silence. A fleeting lull as the court fell into a charged tempo. The whispers ceased, the camera clicks slowed, and all eyes centered on opening proceedings. Each heartbeat seemed loud, resonating with the severity of the moment. Kody's former wives stiffened in their chairs, their expressions inscrutable but their thoughts certainly whirling with recollections, complaints, and aspirations. All of them knew that what would unfold next could decide not only the fate of this hearing, but the public image of their lives and the destiny of their family. It was a time frozen in space, where past and present merged and what had been private became very public. Kody Brown, the man millions had seen struggle with the demands of a polygamous household, was now in a courtroom where things would be required of him to be true, where consequences could not be avoided, and where everything could not be edited or manipulated. The tension, the anticipation, the heavy weight of scrutiny, it was all present, heavy in the air, palpable, near asphyxiating. And with each tick of the clock, the crowd both within the courtroom and globally knew that they were about to see something extraordinary. A clash of fame, family, and the unyielding power of the law. Kody breathed deeply, sensing the weight of the moment upon him. The pop of the cameras had become more than a symbol of glory. It was a reminder that the world was watching, dissecting, and judging. The whispers within the courtroom resembled a drumbeat, every one resonating with the seriousness of the matter. He was no longer just a TV reality star. He was a man responsible for decades of choices, standing before a justice system that insisted on clarity, truth, and answer. And when the doors slammed shut behind him, enclosing the room in a charged silence, it seemed clear that this was only the start. What began as a mundane legal process was set to escalate into an ordeal that would enthrall viewers, shake perceptions, and uncover truths long concealed behind the so masterfully constructed veil of reality television. The courtroom was poised. The world watched, and Kody Brown, experienced though he was, influential though he was, and famous though he was going to experience one of the most dramatic and defining experiences of his life. The instant the judge brought the case to order, the courtroom became silent. All whispers stopped, all motion slowed, and all eyes were trained keenly on what was happening. It was the type of silence that could be cut with a knife, the kind that amplifies the tension in the room until it feels almost unbearable. Kody Brown sat at his table, flanked by his legal team, his posture measured, his expression calm yet tense. But even as he tried to maintain composure, the undercurrent of anxiety was unmistakable. He had endured years of public scrutiny, but this was different. This was the law, the unwavering gaze of authority, and the judgment of people who would not be moved by ratings or narrative manipulation. Then the courtroom exploded in an instance that would eternally be known as the opening blow. One of Kody's former wives stood up from her seat, her eyes fixed on the judge, her voice firm and authoritative. "Your Honor," she started, the words biting and precise. "We come here to reveal the truth." The room collectively breathed in, the tension immediately ratcheting up. Gasp waves spread throughout the courtroom, and even veteran reporters paused in mid-note, sensing that this moment was poised to reset the story. What ensued was more than a statement. It was a statement of intent, a challenge to the man who for decades had held court as a family patriarch and reality television personality. The ex-wife's eyes, blazing and resolute, scanned the courtroom, touching for a moment on Kody, whose face remained impassive but whose hands subtly tightened and released on the table. Those words, "expose the truth," lingered in the air like a storm cloud full of threat and expectation. To Kody, it was a reminder that while cameras had always recorded his life, this was a stage where editing would not keep him safe, and theatrics would not keep him out of the line of fire. The judge, a man of authority whose face did not change, nodded slowly, indicating to the ex-wife that she could proceed. She started to relate years of fiscal irregularities, emotional distress, and personal betrayals, her words accurate but laced with an emotional intensity that engaged every listener in the tale. It was evident she had been meticulously prepared. Every fact, every detail, every emotional shading selected with precision to provide a cogent, irrefutable account. The courtroom hung on every word, leaning forward. This was not merely a hearing. It was a performance of truth, raw and unfiltered, that exposed the complexities of a family life lived in both public fascination and private struggle. As she spoke, Kody's other ex-wives sat in silent support, their eyes reflecting a combination of solidarity, anticipation, and perhaps relief. Each had endured years of public scrutiny, juggling personal grief and family responsibilities, while their lives were broadcast for the world to see. Today, they had an opportunity to reclaim some of that narrative, to ensure that their voices, often overshadowed by headlines, gossip, and reality TV editing, were heard clearly, officially, and legally. Their presence lent gravity to each word, each silence, and each disclosure, carrying the courtroom drama to a near cinematic level of intensity. The ex-wife's testimony started turning away from personal accusations and towards confirmed documentation. She produced emails, bank records, and notarized affidavits, each item expertly selected to support the allegations being made. The rustle of papers and the click of printers made a rhythmic beat that echoed the increased tension in the room. The flash of the cameras slowed with every revelation as they captured faces of shock, disbelief, and thoughtfulness. It was as if the courtroom had become a theater where reality-bound actors performed, where the stakes were infinitely greater than any scripted play. Kody's attorney quickly leaped to counterattack, but the effect of the initial blow had already been registered. Momentum had now turned in favor of the new courtroom environment, and the courtroom thrummed with tension that commanded respect. The ex-wife's voice had broken through formalities and dove directly into decades of hidden tension. Each of the onlookers, from the journalists frantically writing on laptops to the relatives sitting in the gallery, felt that this was not only a matter of monetary disagreements. It was an exposure of long-buried facts, emotional nuances, and family dynamics that had always been subject to public gossiping but never formally questioned before a court of justice. The judge listened attentively, sometimes scribbling notes, his presence a reminder of the power that ruled the room. His quiet demeanor stood in stark contrast to the vehemence of the revelations, reminding that while the courtroom was a forum for theatrical revelations, it was, finally, a forum of law, of evidence, and of consequence. Every word spoken, every paper filed, every tearful entreaty was being taken down and measured with dispassionate accuracy. No space for exaggeration, no space for drama, just facts, evidence, and the stories of real people tied to them. As the proceedings went on, tension between public image and private truth grew more and more evident. Kody, who had grown used to shaping stories with media interviews and reality television editing, now had to deal with the raw glare of a legal process beyond the reach of celebrity or fan devotion. Each revelation by his ex-wife chipped away at the carefully maintained image he had cultivated over decades. The courtroom was not just a legal arena. It was a mirror reflecting every decision, every secret, and every consequence of a life lived both publicly and privately. By the end of the first hour of testimony, it was apparent to all that the initial blow had established the tone for the entire hearing. The courtroom was filled with a charge that made each breath feel heavier, each motion more weighted. Kody's ex-wife walked back to her seat with a calm, almost victorious air about her, while Kody's face remained inscrutable, a blend of stoicism and secret calculation. The crowd, both within the courtroom and observing from media reports, recognized the drama had merely just begun, with the revelations that had already emerged only the tip of the iceberg. With the gavel's light touch to signify the completion of the first half of the hearing, tension still hung heavy in the courtroom. All the guests, from reporters to law clerks, realized that they had just seen something significant, a declaration that would reverberate throughout the case, the media, and public opinion. Kody Brown, the individual who had been a household name for so long, was now confronted with a reality that no television could soften, no cut could conceal, and no fan base could insulate him from. The first blow had struck, and the courtroom was well and truly plunged into a drama that would test assumptions, expose secrets, and subject a family's intricate past to the harsh glare of the law. And as the doors closed for a short break, whispers started anew, this time more vehement, more persistent. Social media accounts were already buzzing with rumor, screenshots, live observations. Each detail, each move, each emotional tick would be picked apart and argued for days ahead. It wasn't so much about money, it was about fairness, trust, and the family dynamics that had shaped Kody's public image for decades. The courtroom was transformed into a stage where decades' worth of private choices were put out for public opinion. The ex-wives outlined not just the financial inaccuracies, but the personal distress it had caused them. They explained sleepless nights, wondering about their children's future, the anxiety of juggling household chores while dealing with uncertainty, and the devastation of realizing that the one man they trusted most might have been keeping them in the dark about important information. The judge sat patiently, at times looking over at the lawyers as they pointed to paperwork, nodding slightly at crucial moments. Each piece of evidence, each witness, was another step toward a grander story, a story that undermined Kody's reputation as the devoted patriarch he had created for the cameras. The courtroom, though proper and collected on the surface, was electric with tension. All the observers felt that these disclosures had the potential to radically change the course of the case and the image of the family in the public eye. Kody's defense lawyers reacted judiciously by raising doubts about the authenticity of some of the documents and suggesting that some of the transactions had plausible explanations. They tried to put the inconsistencies in the form of clerical mistakes or misunderstandings, and not deliberate deception. But the accumulation of evidence marshaled by the ex-wives was overwhelming. Each spreadsheet, email, and notarized statement seemed to reinforce the same conclusion that Kody had acted in a way that excluded his former spouses from critical financial decisions. The most striking moment came when the financial advisor presented a series of charts comparing income and expenditures over the past decade. The visual evidence made it undeniable. Substantial amounts had been diverted in a manner that seemed to serve solely Kody or particular members of the family. The courtroom hushed as the charts were displayed on a screen, revealing patterns that were hard to argue with. The attorneys for the ex-wives methodically indicated the discrepancies, linking them to particular events and choices, illuminating the years of influence on the family. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Kody sat quietly, absorbing the testimony, his face impassive, but his body nonverbal with a blend of frustration, worry, and introspection. The reality television personality that viewers had grown accustomed to seeing, charming, charismatic, and joking at times, was removed, replaced by a man facing the hard realities of his choices. All eyes in the room rested on him, examining, accusing, and waiting for his reaction. The ex-wives did not only use statistics, they provided anecdotes about financial hardship and individual sacrifices. One remembered having to independently support mortgages, car payments, and household bills while leaving larger investments to Kody. Another explained that family vacation plans, college savings, and children's healthcare bills had been derailed by the missing money. These individual stories brought the cold, hard figures to life as a human, tangible cost. The courtroom was not merely taking in evidence, it was taking in the emotional toll behind every deal. The judge, a stickler for his deliberate and neutral nature, reminded the courtroom on several occasions of the power of evidence and discussion based on fact. Nevertheless, even his detached nature could not suppress the tension in the room. The testimony was persuasive, and the emotional accounts offered up by the two ex-wives brought a depth of feeling that no spreadsheet could ever replicate. The juxtaposition of financial records and personal account created a storm that Kody would be forced to endure, and it was becoming more and more obvious that the result of the case might hang on these findings. As the hearing drew to a close, the tension was palpable. Reporters murmured, cameras snapped constantly, and the crowd in the courtroom hung in suspense. Kody's ex-wives walked back to their seats with smug satisfaction, aware that they had laid bare budget choices once hidden behind closed doors. Kody's attorneys calmly retreated into huddles, preparing for the next round of defense, well aware that the public and the court would scrutinize every line of argument. At that moment, the courtroom was a stage upon which the personal and public lives of one of television's most iconic reality TV families converged. The long-hidden financial secrets were suddenly on display, confronting Kody with the realities of choices made for years behind closed doors. Each witness, be it a legal expert, journalist, or devotee, knew that the moment was one of significance, not just in the courtroom but in the unfolding drama of the Brown clan. And with the gavel calling for an abbreviated break, there was a tacit understanding in the air. Today's revelations were merely the tip of the iceberg. The money secrets revealed were more than figures on paper. They were a glimpse into trust, betrayal, and the delicate dance of family dynamics. For Kody Brown, the drama had begun. For his former wives, the time had come to make sure their voices were heard and understood. And for the world to watch, this courtroom spectacle held out the promise of further revelations, further conflict, and greater insight into a family whose personal lives had long been the object of fascination for millions. The courtroom grew heavy with silence as attention shifted from documents and numbers to human drama. It was easy enough to look at spreadsheets and account statements before the judge. It was different to listen to the stark, personal testimony of those who had lived out the aftermath. The ex-wives took a breath and started to talk, one at a time, telling stories that were as moving as they were exposing. Every word vibrated in the room, transforming the chilly, rigid atmosphere of the courtroom into an arena filled with individual truth. The first ex-wife stood up, her hands folded tightly in front of her, attempting to balance herself against the tide of feeling. Her voice, initially controlled, started to shake as she remembered the years of sacrifice she had undertaken. She talked of sleepless nights spent worrying for the safety and well-being of her children, of financial costs that she had borne largely on her own, and of the psychic toll of having to endure a family dynamic that was always in the public eye. Every word bore the weight of years of perseverance, of hurdles masked beneath the slick surface of a television show. As she recited her tale, the courtroom was riveted. The murmurs of journalists stopped completely. Even the judge appeared briefly shaken, his pen hovering over the notes he was making. There was a fleeting sense of vulnerability in the room, a common understanding of human experience beyond the legal matters at hand. Viewers at home, watching footage or listening to reports, would instantly identify with the universal issues of trust, betrayal, and family duty. This was no longer a mere disagreement. It was a glimpse into the emotional fallout from choices made within an involved high-profile family. The second wife followed, her testimony similarly engaging but more about the emotional toll of residing within a home under constant scrutiny by the world. She discussed raising kids in front of cameras, the constant tightrope between private and public life, and the anger of having her voice drowned out by the more assertive narrative of the show. Her words cast an image of strength, endurance, and unassuming courage, recalling to the minds of all in attendance that behind every statistic, every dispute over property, and every accounting discrepancy, there were real people with real emotions. A particularly moving moment arose when she spoke of one particular incident involving her children. She related how an impulsive economic choice had upset a well-planned college savings, rendering her worried and apprehensive about the future of her kids. Her voice trembled as she spoke, tears brimming in her eyes, and the courtroom literally held its collective breath. For a brief moment, the line between reality TV drama and actual stakes was erased. The audience witnessed a mother struggling not for the sake of entertainment, but for the stability, security, and self-respect of her family. Kody remained silent, his face unemotional but unmistakably shaken. He had endured the scrutiny of the media for decades, but these personal testimonies resonated differently. There were no cameras to roll for ratings, no scripts to write, no edits to mute the effect. This was raw, unfiltered emotion. The world he had constructed to put on display for the public, crashed up against the reality of his family members' actual lives. And the courtroom, although formal and formalized, became a stage for the deep human implications of his choices. The third wife's testimony followed a different trajectory. She dwelled on the emotional work of living with a mixed family and trying to navigate intricate personal relationships. She referenced long-term trade-offs, of always mediating among siblings and parents, and of the psychological cost of attempting to keep peace while struggling with feelings of betrayal and exclusion. Each bit of information she presented added texture to the story, rendering intangible allegations concrete, realistic experiences with which all members of the courtroom could identify. Her testimony brought to the foreground the interdependence of monetary, personal, and emotional choices, showing that the effects of one decision tended to spread many times farther than immediate situations. During the session, the judge listened intently, sometimes nodding or making notes. The courtroom, which was generally a sanctum of procedure and bureaucracy, had become an arena of compassion and understanding. The emotional testimony served not just to supplement the financial evidence, it humanized it. Each dollar wasted, each document withheld, each disputed decision now linked to individuals, sacrifice, and heartbreak. The courtroom spectators, and those at home who were watching the world, were forced to see the human price of decisions that had been previously hidden by television production and public mindset. The lawyers representing Kody tried to chime in every now and then, posing a question or asking for clarification, but the emotional gravitas of the testimonies was unavoidable. Even the most experienced legal minds appeared taken aback by the personal richness and intensity of the narratives being shared. The session shifted away from procedural jockeying and toward witnessing years of experience, travail, and perseverance. The testimonies underscored that above and beyond the statistics and legal briefs, the authentic measure of influence rested in the human lives affected by these rulings. Another compelling moment came when an ex-wife spoke of her efforts to talk openly with Kody throughout the years regarding finances and family planning. She spoke of conversations that had resulted in frustration, misunderstanding, or rejection, making her feel powerless and discounted. These testimonies struck home in the courtroom, bringing to the surface a side of Kody seldom seen on television, a man who is dealing with complex relationships with many spouses, each of whom has good reasons for concern, expectation, and feeling. Between individual responsibility and familial dynamics, tensions became starkly highlighted, and it was apparent that working out these issues took more than judicial decisions. It took acknowledgement, compassion, and responsibility. As the emotional testimonies came to a close, the courtroom was still heavy with the weight of shared experience. Reporters mouthed quietly, sharing impressions as cameras recorded every slightest expression, the tense clasp of a hand, a blink held a fraction too long, a tear hastily wiped away. For viewers both in the room and watching online, the scene was riveting, human, and deeply affecting. It was a reminder to all that beneath the public phenomenon of fame, reality television, and social media judgment existed actual lives, actual decisions, and actual ramifications. At last, as the gavel brought an end to this portion, there was a somber sense of closure. The court knew enough to recognize that the proceedings could easily spiral out of control if honesty was sacrificed. As the judge's words settled in, the mood in the courtroom became tense with anticipation. Reporters murmured among themselves, commenting on the ferocity of the warning and wondering at its possible effect on the case. Cameras zeroed in on Kody, documenting minute changes in his face. A quick tightening of the jaw, a fleeting blink, a hand clenching the table edge. People at home watching felt almost as though they could sense the charged atmosphere in the courtroom, a combination of anticipation, tension, and wonder. This was legal drama, but also real-life consequences played out before millions of viewers. The testimony of the ex-wives, coupled with the warning from the judge, established firmly the tone for the remainder of the trial. The power dynamic, the gravitas of evidence, and the necessity of truth had all been underscored. Both sides of the court understood that mistakes would be seen, recorded, and ultimately used against them. For Kody, the warning was clear. The court would not abide by half-truths, avoiding omissions or evasions. This was the turning point, one that called for candor, integrity, and prompt admission of past conduct. Piling on the seriousness, the judge reminded the court that the case was not just about money. It was about equality, trust, and responsibility within a family whose relationships had been put under the microscope for many years. The concerns brought forward in this courtroom impact actual individuals, their futures, and their kids, he said. This court will make certain that justice is served, and that calls for full transparency from everybody. The statement had a moral tone, indicating that the legal process was not only about numbers and papers, but human consequences and obligation. The ex-wives quietly nodded in agreement, reinforced by the judge's words. Their hard work and preparation were vindicated, and the gravity of their witness bore even more importance. Kody, on the other hand, said nothing, absorbing the weight of the reprimand. Years of living in the public eye, cultivating family relationships, and dictating narrative through the media had all boiled down to this. The courtroom was a forum where only veracity would suffice, and every aspect of his actions, choices, and lack thereof would be examined with precision. As the hearing went on, the judge explained that obedience to court order would not only affect the legal ruling, but also affect public opinion. In the era of social media and reality television, the actions of the courtroom are never entirely confidential. Every witness, every piece of paper, every word has the potential to be aired, dissected, and discussed globally. The judge's stern warning thus had a twofold purpose: reinforcing legal responsibility, while tacitly reminding all present that the court of public opinion was equally merciless as the court of law. By the time the session drew to a close, the effect of the warning was evident. The courtroom was electric with a sense of purpose and attention. Kody's former wives had presented their case, the passionate testimonies had been given, and the judge's strict advice had established the ground rules. The seriousness of the proceedings was evident to all. Honesty, clarity, and accountability would characterize the outcome. The courtroom had become a crucible where public examination, legal obligation, and personal responsibility clashed in a high-stakes drama that would make a lasting impression on all concerned. When the gavel came down, calling for a brief recess, the air was still charged. The ex-wives shared subdued nods. Kody spoke in hushed tones with his lawyers, and the press hummed with rumors. The stern warning from the judge had left one thing crystal clear. This was not theater, not stage drama, not misdirection or manipulation. This was a courtroom, and in this court the truth not only would be demanded, it would be enforced. For Kody Brown and his family, the warning was both a warning and a challenge, a message that the decisions made next would not only decide the fate of the case, but the lasting legacy of one of reality TV's most heavily scrutinized families. The courtroom was already charged with tension, but at that moment it rose to something almost intolerable. The air was charged, the heartbeat of every person in the room heightened, as though all those there realized that what was soon to unfold might rewrite the entire case. Kody Brown had endured media attention, reality television melodrama, and public condemnation for decades. But he was not ready for this, a surprise that would rock the courtroom and his public persona to its foundation. The final straw was when the ex-wife's financial advisor, who had been summoned, was requested to put his results in writing. His speech was initially measured, bordering on technical, detailing discrepancies in accounts, habits of spending, and previously overlooked transfers. But as he delved further into the evidence, the tale got much more incendiary. He disclosed that a set of transactions, skillfully designed over decades, indicated that Kody had deliberately withheld property from his former wives. The room seemed to hold its collective breath, as if the very walls were waiting in stunned silence. Gasps and whispers filled the courtroom. Journalists wrote frantically, taking photographs and recording every face. Even experienced legal experts shared shocked looks. This was no typical revelation. It was a bombshell, revealing a degree of fraud which had long been suspected but never proven. Each figure, each transfer, each email chronicled the trend. Money, assets, and resources that should have been tracked were routinely siphoned off. Kody's former wives sat with a combination of vindication and relief. They had suffered years of frustration, frequently feeling unable to contest decisions that impacted their lives and the destiny of their children. Now, with proof in their hands, their accusations were no longer mere allegations. Now they were substantiated by irrefutable evidence. The emotional burden of years of uncertainty was suddenly amplified by the cold calculation of financial reality. They shared fleeting glances, the unspoken recognition that their determination and meticulous preparation had led them to this pivotal point. Kody's lawyers moved hurriedly to react. Pages rustled, hushed conferences were passed from hand to hand, and discreet signals of urgency were exchanged between lawyers. But no matter, for the evidence appeared insurmountable. Graphs, and exhaustive reports presented a visual picture that could not readily be refuted. The financial advisor led the court systematically through each of the anomalies, drawing out the patterns and linking them directly to choices Kody had made along the way. Each new disclosure was like a blow against the deliberately staged public persona of a man many had seen as a dedicated patriarch and father. The effect on Kody was instant. His face remained composed, but his fingers drummed nervously against the table, betraying the tension beneath the surface. Years of managing a public persona, of navigating the optics of reality television, suddenly collided with the reality of irrefutable evidence. The courtroom was no longer merely a legal environment. It had become a platform upon which discreet actions, once hidden behind the camera's eye, and carefully crafted storytelling, were exposed to judgment. The judge, himself calm and unruffled, took it all in with measured deliberation. Even he, however, could not mask the slight crease between his brows as he reviewed the facts. This was no trivial matter, not only in terms of financial consequence, but in terms of questions of trust, responsibility, and integrity. His earlier stern warnings rang even more intensely. Truth and transparency were not to be bargained for, and Kody was being put through an examination that called for absolute accountability. The drama inside the courtroom was replicated outside in real time. Social media streams burst with speculation, opinion, and outrage. Headlines scrolled across TVs and mobile devices globally. Kody Brown exposed in court and financial secrets revealed. Millions of viewers who had watched the family's story on TV suddenly viewed the case entirely differently. The dramatic reversal in the courtroom had become a dramatic reversal in public opinion. Witnesses were brought in to confirm the conclusions of the financial advisor. One former family accountant testified regarding imbalances she had observed during the years but had not known how to rectify, citing the intricacy of Kody's financial setup. Another relative described conversations in which Kody purportedly assured them that specific money was being managed properly, only to find out subsequently that the assets had been sent elsewhere. Every testimony added greater depth to the revelation, validating patterns of behavior, and creating a clearer picture of alleged cover-up. The courtroom became an emotional pressure cooker of strategy and scrutiny. Kody spoke rarely, sometimes exchanging a few words with his lawyers, every whispered consultation heavy with urgency. The ex-wives, however, did not falter. Each and every piece of evidence, each and every supportive testimony substantiated their account, legitimizing years of worry and dismay. For them, this was not simply a fight in court, it was a vindication, a time when their voices could no longer be silenced or downplayed. There was one especially dramatic exchange when a formerly secret account came to light. The advisor showed that not only had money been withheld, but also there had been concerted efforts to hide the transactions, by means of sophisticated financial strategies. The courtroom audience leaned forward, entranced by the drama unfolding before them. Even veteran reporters hushed each other, admitting the significance of the disclosure. For Kody, the exposure of these transactions represented the vulnerability of intricately spun fabrications, both private and public. Before the session came to an end, the courtroom was charged with electricity. The climax had turned the tide decisively in their favor. The ex-wives now held the advantage, their allegations supported by factual testimony and expert opinions. Kody wasn't only faced with the legal consequences of these revelations, but with the public fallout as well. Each flash of camera, each jotting down of notes, each murmured aside served to reinforce the magnitude of the moment. It was no longer just a courtroom hearing. It had become a defining page in a family drama that had enthralled millions. With the gavel called for a momentary recess, there was an instant of almost tangible tension. Everyone present knew that the disclosures of the day would determine the rest of the trial. Kody's ex-wives shared discreet glances, their resolve unbroken, while Kody and his lawyers reassembled, knowing that the days ahead would bring careful maneuvering of both legal and public opinion. The tide had turned, the scales of the case had tipped, and each step now would be weighed against the irrefutable power of truth now exposed. For television viewers in the courtroom and worldwide, this moment summarized the drama, tension, and intrigue of the Brown family saga. It was a watershed moment not only in the court proceedings, but in the story of trust, responsibility, and the payback of decisions made in secret. And for Kody Brown, it was a harsh reminder that all the fame and charisma in the world could not immunize him from the unrelenting gaze of both law and truth. The courtroom still echoed with the final words when the story burst forth into the public arena. Social media accounts in minutes were filled with posts, tweets, and videos that analyzed every aspect of the hearing. Hashtags tracked globally, #Kody Brown Court, #Sister Wives Drama, #Family Secrets Exposed. The fans and critics alike provided instant commentary, some being shocked, others outraged, and others yet who defended or condemned Kody's actions. The courtroom drama had become a turning point in the public psyche, and nobody was able to avert their eyes. Journalists scrambled to get quotes from witnesses, lawyers, and even bystanders. Media channels rushed to air excerpts of the financial disclosures and tearful depositions, packaging the story in sensationalized headlines that promised scandal, betrayal, and shock. TV news anchors replayed clips, pausing to emphasize important points, secret accounts, secret assets, and individual depositions that visibly strained the courtroom. The public was mesmerized as the private dramas of a reality family were exposed, with law standing behind every accusation. The media frenzy wasn't restricted to reporters. Sister Wives fans flooded comment spaces, forums, and live streams, dissecting the case in real time. Some showed sympathy towards the ex-wives, admiring their tenacity and strength. Others wondered at Kody's intentions, arguing if his actions constituted deliberate hiding or mishandling. Memes and viral entries soon followed, making light of or sarcastically analyzing the courtroom drama, so that even strangers to the show were drawn into the storm of discourse. Within a few hours, the courtroom secrets were a world conversation. The media onslaught was merciless. Headlines blared, "Kody Brown exposed in court," "Sister Wives secrets revealed," and "Financial betrayal shocks reality TV star." Social media algorithms pushed each tale to new heights, flooding clips of courtroom shock expressions, testimony quotes, and financial reports to millions of people around the world. Analysts weighed the evidence, debating not only the legal consequences, but also the personal and family consequences that would most certainly ensue. The court's turning point had now officially become a media spectacle, with each and every detail parsed for entertainment, insight, or outrage. Inside the courtroom itself, tension still hung in the air even after recess. Legal teams parsed media reports, bracing for public scrutiny that would inevitably result following each day of hearings. Kody's lawyers talked over plans not only for defending their client legally, but for wresting control of the narrative outside the courtroom. The teams of the ex-wives, however, were aware that public sympathy would be an asset, backing them up to assert their credibility and highlight the human aspect of the revelations. The confluence of media and law had never been so real and powerful, making every legal point a possible story to go viral. The reactions of social media were to blur the lines between opinion and fact. Cuts of emotional testimony were spreading fast, with accompanying commentary guessing at Kody's body language and attitude. A few interpreted tiny gestures, such as a flash of tension in his eyes or a brief hesitation in his answer, as indicators of guilt or unease. Others admired the ex-wives' poise, hailing them for their bravery in addressing years of complicated family dynamics. The courtroom drama that had previously been contained in a physical setting had now burst onto a worldwide stage where anyone could have their say, comment, and shape public opinion. The public interest was not only generated by the accusations, but by the recognizability of the Brown family. Public opinion surveys, social media sentiment tracking, and online forums suggested a seismic shift in public perception. Where curiosity or admiration might have previously ruled the day, skepticism, worry, and criticism now were at the forefront of conversation. The courtroom had opened not only financial information, but personal decisions, issues of trust, and relational dynamics that sounded much louder than the walls of the chamber. In the meantime, pundits discussed what the courtroom soap opera portended for the family's future. Some said that the exposure had the potential to bring reconciliation or empathy, because openness could necessitate tough discussions that had previously been sidestepped. Others thought the revelations would widen gaps, even cementing permanent fissures that no judicial ruling could ever completely heal. The collision of law, media, and familial relationships was a tangled web that was riveting and enthralling audiences everywhere. For Kody Brown, the public response was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, his public image and reputation were on trial, with potentially disastrous consequences for his career, relationships, and family life. On the other, the worldwide publicity meant that the courtroom drama, the evidence heard, and the testimonies of the ex-wives were all well known, ensuring that their experiences went out to an enormous number of people. Each camera flash, each viral video, each trending hashtag escalated the courtroom drama, making sure everyone knew this was no ordinary court case. It was a worldwide phenomenon. As the day drew to a close, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation for the next session. Social media chatter continued unabated, journalists prepared analysis pieces, and viewers around the world eagerly awaited the unfolding story. The turning point in the courtroom had created a domino effect. Legal revelations triggered media frenzy. Media frenzy amplified public scrutiny, and public scrutiny in turn intensified the stakes of every subsequent courtroom session. For all concerned, the courtroom was no longer a strictly legal forum. It was a stage, and the crowd was much larger than could fit inside the building. Kody Brown, his former wives, and their attorneys were all actors in a drama that blended law, emotion, and public interest in a way that few cases ever accomplish. Each step, each word, and each choice would now be measured not only by the judge, but by the world's millions of eyes. And as night began to fall and social media streams kept lighting up with commentary, speculation, and indignation, it was clear that the Brown family saga had reached a new level, one in which courtroom disclosures, public opinion, and media attention fused to fashion a more compelling, more melodramatic, and more impactful story than anything previously watched on television. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was charged beyond words when the trial finally was about to reach its conclusion. Days of tearful testimony, fiscal disclosures, and relentless questioning had coalesced a tension so dense that it felt the air itself would shatter. Any movement, any huddled conference between attorneys, any look passed between Kody Brown and his former wives was burdened with a weight infinitely more substantial than any procedure in a courtroom could possibly carry. The world was waiting, and the tension was palpable, not only in the room, but on screens around the globe, where millions were waiting breathlessly in real time. Kody was seated at the defense table, his face impassive, but there was a tenuous tension in the curled and uncurled fists of his hands, revealing the tempest of feelings beneath. For weeks he had endured the glare of public attention, media hype, and unflinching depositions from his former wives. He had weathered headlines, viral videos, and online arguments, but now the ultimate payoff, the verdict, was close at hand. Every passing moment seemed drawn out, the clock ticking not in minutes, but in anticipation that seemed to freeze time itself. The judge appeared, and the room fell silent at once. Cameras clicked, pens were poised above notebooks, and even the reporters in the back appeared to be holding their breath collectively. The measured tread of the judge, the discreet clearing of his throat, and the adjusting of his robe indicated that the moment everyone had been anticipating had finally arrived. This was not simply a ruling on money accounts or legalities. It was a verdict on trust, duty, and the repercussions of secretive decisions for years. The judge summarized the hearing in detailed precision before rendering the verdict. He reminded the courtroom of the heart-wrenching testimonies, the comprehensive financial proof, and the reminders he had given of honesty and openness. This case, he said, his voice firm but compelling, has uncovered more than mere discrepancies in finances. It has uncovered the profound effect of choices on real individuals, their families, their trust, and their future. Each word underscored the severity of the situation, leaving no doubt that the courthouse drama had hard, long-lasting consequences. The ex-wives sat elegant, their faces calm but eyes aglow with the intensity of the moment. They had struggled not only for justice, but for recognition, evidence that their voices counted, that their stories were true, and that the truth could not be suppressed. For them, the climax of this trial was something greater than legal outcome. It was a testament to survival, perseverance, and strength. Every movement, every slight adjustment in body language, spoke volumes of a blend of anticipation, hope, and determination. Kody stood silent, his ears tuned in, taking in the seriousness of the summary. He had been under scrutiny for years on reality shows, but what was at stake here was completely different. This was law, not television. Truth, not made-up fiction. Consequence, not a ratings number. He understood that no charisma, no media spin, and no popular appeal could change the severity of what was to be declared. The courtroom was a furnace of accountability, and each and every detail of his previous conduct would now come up for the ultimate test of judgment. And then there was the silence that caused the room to collectively take a breath. The judge rearranged his papers, glanced up in the courtroom, and started sketching out his decision. He recognized the diligent evidence brought forth by the ex-wives, the money irregularities uncovered, and the emotional toll of Kody's choices. Every detail was met with precision, bolstering the story that had been crafted painstakingly across weeks of hearings. The courtroom hung in expectant silence except for the faint rustling of papers and the occasional deepening of breath. The verdict was delivered laboriously, slowly, each word weighed with import above its ordinary meaning. The court supported the ex-wives on central financial discrepancies, compelling restitution for assets withheld and proper distribution of funds. The decisiveness of the ruling gave no room for interpretation. The court acknowledged the merits of the ex-wives' claims, the accuracy of their documentation, and legitimacy of their complaints. For the first time ever in court, a very real feeling of closure started to come over the place, even in the midst of lingering tension for the day. The former wives granted themselves a soft, muted smile, a quiet but unmistakable gesture of vindication. Their strength, planning, and bravery had proved successful. Justice, in the guise of recognition and reparation, was being finally achieved. Cameras documented the moment, the quiet breath of relief, the fleeting clench of hands and mutual exultation, the small but significant looks shared between the women who had so long shouldered the burden of doubt. Kody, on the other hand, stayed calm on the surface, but his response was evident in discreet, telling moments: a clenched jaw, a careful breath, a slight headshake. The decision was not a personal vendetta, it was a judicial finding based upon evidence, witness accounts, and the dictates of justice and responsibility. But it had unmistakable implications for his public standing, personal relations, and reputation. He now confronted not only financial burden, but the issue of balancing public image with private truth of the family he had commanded for decades. The judge summarized with words echoing far beyond the courtroom: "Let this decision serve as a reminder that accountability is not only a legal imperative, it is a moral imperative. Decisions have consequences, and honesty, transparency, and respect are essential in every relationship, personal or professional." The words were an appropriate ending to a trial that revealed not only numbers or transactions, but the social, emotional, and ethical aspects of a family's rich history. Outside of court, the media frenzy broke out all over again. Headlines blared with relief and scandal. Kody Brown's bank secrets exposed. Ex-wives enjoy court triumph. Justice is served after heart-wrenching testimonies. Social media blew up with responses. Some rejoicing over the win for the ex-wives, others dissecting Kody's behavior, and even more arguing the larger implications for reality TV and popular opinion. For fans around the globe, this decision seemed a cliffhanger ending to a drama that had been watched with riveted interest for years. Within the courtroom, there was relief, even as discussions and conferences proceeded in hushed tones. The ex-wives had gotten some measure of justice and validation. Kody had been confronted with the full force of exposure, reckoning, and media scrutiny. The gavel had come down not only on a legal matter, but on years of mystery, rumor, and emotional drama. The courtroom saga that had fascinated tens of millions was now officially over, but its impact would continue to reverberate in the public psyche for years to come. Undefined as the courtroom cleared, cameras caught the last glimpses. The ex-wives departing with quiet grace, Kody conferring with his lawyers, and reporters enunciating the verdict for viewers around the globe. The drama that had begun with whispers, tensions, and disclosures now came to its powerful end. It was a tale of responsibility, bravery, and the indelible subtlety of human relationships. For millions of viewers, it was reality television transcended. It was a stark reminder of truth, consequence, and the burden of decisions in the most public and intimate of stages. And when the doors swung shut on the last of the guests, the tale of Kody Brown, his former wives, and the courtroom that witnessed years of secrets and strife remained a testament to the drama, intensity, and humanity that had made this epic unforgettable. The verdict had loomed, arrived, and left a scar that would not quickly be erased.